all of those things all of those forces that we've just mentioned are also hungry to know us. It's a mutual invitation. They're waiting for us because it's where we belong.
Hello, and welcome to Sacred Herbalism, the full moon segment of the Elder Tree podcast, where we explore how plants can support us to enter into a sacred relationship with life and the living world. I'm Stephanie Hazel, and I've recorded this episode beneath the gaze of epic Wollumbin, where I live in Bundjalung country, and I pay my respects to the First Nations people of this land, as well as to the spirits and plants of this ancient earth. If you love what we do, you can support the Elder Tree mission of putting medicine in the hands of the people by joining our Patreon, where you can access special teachings from our presenters and our interviewees. So, let's walk into the moonlit forest together. Are you ready? Today I speak to old friend Nila Chandra, who is a folk herbalist and witch worker of 30 years experience, who offers and teaches tarot, rites of passage, ritual facilitation and magical remediation. Today we gather around the cauldron to talk about all things witchcraft. Welcome, dear Nila. Such a beautiful pleasure to be here. Sharing this conversation on a topic that is really close to both our hearts. I know that for me, witchcraft and the term witch is a very loaded word, and I think for a lot of people as well, and one that still evokes some level of fear and excitement. And I have a lot of respect for who you are and how you walk with that word and what that means to you. All the way from Arizona, where you are now located, even though you have been a far north Queenslander for many, many years of your life, now living in a different land. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's really super beautiful and a real pleasure to be here. I feel really honored. Thank you so much for asking me.
So a piece of writing that I actually emailed you 5 years ago that I thought I would share just to set the scene of some of the whispers of communication and ponderings that we've shared on this topic before. It goes like this. I was a witch once, you know. The power of it, the memory of it, the fear of it live deep in my bones. I see myself there on the edge of the village, a small stone cottage hovering between the wild forest and the domesticated town. This is the natural habitat of the witch, the twilight zone, living between the wildness of the soul and the purity of the mind. I say the power of it, for it is a power, though not what people fear or like to whisper of on dark nights when small humans or small animals die of a sudden. I say the power of it, for there is a power there. It is the power of connection to life, of seeing the threads that connect us to the world of plants and spirit and animal, of seeing and often of helping. If there is a thread of luminous light that weaves that herb to this body, then assist it. Gather it when it wants to be gathered. Dry it or soak it and grind it. Listen carefully to your instructions. And preserve it for when it is needed, when it speaks to you. Be the hand of the magic and give over the medicine to the right person. To the person who walks in your door, carefully avoiding the hanging pots, the drying branches, the collected trinkets that they will mistake for charms. They only serve to remind you of important things. That is the power of their charm. When that person walks in and they somehow feel the same as the plant who asks you to harvest it, then help them come together. And then listen carefully to the body soul of the person before you and pay attention to how the light changes in their body. This is the power of the witch. To remember what is important, to pay attention to the light, to follow instructions you are given, to keep 1 foot and 1 eye in the wilds and 1 foot and 1 eye in the calm. I say the memory of it, for it is seeped into my soul in a way I cannot explain. It is not my memory, so I do not know where it comes from, but it comes from a place that is real. It is a memory I see when I drift into my own wild soul. It is a memory I feel when I walk in the woods of many different lands. It is a memory that awakens in me when I cross paths with the others, the other ones who also remember. I remember the gratitude of the women, the silent complicity that many would feel as they sought my help. They too had memories stirring in their blood, but dared not listen too closely. That is why I was there. That is why I bore the burden of solitude, the burden of hearing too much noise in the twilight, too many secrets of the sick and the broken. There is a giving up of the self that has to happen in walking the forest path. You become hollow. You must become hollow to fill yourself with the attention and presence and silence that allows the healing, that allows the hearing, that allows the seeing of the light strings that connect the people to the plants and the spirits. The ultimate surrender to the mystery that they were unwilling to do. I write this, and the word mystery wobbles and becomes master, and, of course, the fear. Those who are furthest from the wildness within themselves, who hold it at bay through tight bonds of shame and fury lest it escape and their own wild nature devour the very things they hold dear about themselves. Those who are furthest from the wildness see the surrender and they do not understand. They imagine that I must have a master who tells me with words and will how to heal and how to harm. They cannot imagine that the magic and the mystery are just there, hovering around them like a cloud of tiny shining gnats and available to all. I say the fear of it, for there is always fear hovering around what cannot be easily understood with the mind. People will fear and then cause you to fear. I cannot speak clearly of the fear that comes when the people go mad with agony and seek to burn their agony and powerlessness in the shape of your own body. The trembling will come over me, and I will lose the delicate connection with these threads of life.
Such a conjuring, that like stirring all that sediment from in the deep to be pulled up to look at and feel and sniff and smell and inhale and have tears over. And something that has been really like strong for me and up in regards to that of late is like uh, this real feeling of like that the loss is so great, and yet we have these elemental forces and this natural conductivity and that we're conduits for that around us, and that what it takes ultimately to recalibrate that tapestry is to be the hollow, like you mentioned in that beautiful poem that you read, that was how we were taught in the first place. And that it's like actually when we come behind that and strip back that next level, it's like our birthright is to be connected with nature, and nature is going to teach us and help us to remember. And I feel like that a really powerful way that's working for me in regards to that recalibration is with working with fire, because fire was what did that ethnic cleansing in the first place. It's a way to call in and recollect that which was sort of transmuted in that, like working with phoenix sort of element of that, and having that communication with the flame in this way that's very subtle. I feel like that the flame kind of is like the record keeper of that work, of that knowledge. It's a hint, it's a whisper that I've got at the moment that feels really like it's just coming in. And so I guess within that, what I am doing now is taking like this next level along with that, with working with particular plants, with creating like spirits with like alcohol. I put the plants into alcohol and I inform the alcohol of like the job that I'm wanting it to do. I have and sometimes I'll make sigils that go on the outside of the bottle for that also give it a propensity of the concept of how it is that I'm wanting it to work, and I let it brew
over a period of time. Sometimes I will run a candle over the top of the bottle to let that candle, as it sort of like falls and cascades, and that firelight inform the fluid that is brewing and marinating on the inside of the bottle. And I wait until it sort of lets me know that it's ready, and then I will put it into some sort of pan, or I have a few different like modalities that I use to do it, but I'll pop it into a little pot of sort. Maybe I'll do like, you know, 3 centimeters worth of the fluid into the bottom of some sort of vessel, and then I light it on fire, and I talk to it, and I ask it, and I introduce myself, and I listen and I watch, because things appear in there, and I kind of just let it like wash through me, and I let myself wash through it. It's like this symbiotic relationship of working with that, and I particularly find that this act itself brings an awash of memory of all different sorts of things around, you know, formula and medicines, and understanding about different things and how they work, about plants and how they work, about, I can ask about specific things, or I get shown different things to do that will help sort of like add more propensity to certain workings that I might have going on in my altar. Just finding it's like a really powerful way to communicate.
So many things in there that are amazing. Firstly, I totally want to have a bottle of your magical witch fire to communicate with. But yeah, I think a few things you were saying there. One is like paying attention, listening and watching, and listening for those instructions, waiting for this brew you're making to tell you that it's ready, right? And I think this is part of how we reclaim the depths of what it is to be a witch, or to be a communication vessel between earth and people, right? Sitting in that twilight zone, straddling the wild and the calms. I think that listening, following instructions, watching, paying attention, and these are also things that have come through in the conversations I've had on this podcast a lot around how do we be in sacred relationship with plants. And there's a recurring theme of deep listening, of reverence and listening. And it's a skill that we have lost, right? Like, we're so good at talking, we're so good at being seen, but we're not very good at deep listening anymore. And I think most traditional peoples would have some kind of phrase that means something similar to listening to country. Like, how do we pay attention to the things that are bigger than just our own needs and desires?
Like that thing of the deep listening and watching for patterns is like, if somebody was to ask me, what is a witch? Like, what is that? This is what I think about this a lot. Like, how even owning the word is really hard. And I think it's sort of like step number one, which is sort of, I'm finally at a point where that is something that I can do. I can put my hand up for that. And yeah, but the watching of those patterns, that deep listening, and I feel like the next thing that is sort of part of that, of what witchcraft is, or what a witch does, is that we are technicians that work with those patterns, that work with that listening, work with that paying attention, and follow through with what it is that we are being shown to do, and how to, like, it's all like a giant circuit board that is needing adjustment and tweaking, just like if we're working with a motherboard, or we're working with a sound system where we're doing a graphic equalizer. It's like you're looking at how to make these, where it is that we, as living, breathing human beings who have fingers and toes and an ability to speak, we have this, there's a mission for us in that, in working with the patterns. There's things that we can do that other creatures can't. And so I feel like that nature really calls on us sometimes to be the one to take action around things. I had an example of that was the other day. I was up on the mountain, and we were doing some work on creating paths, and I found this particular tree, and there was this branch underneath it that had fallen and was dead, and it sort of looked just not great in the area that we were working on, and we were making it all pretty. And I said to my partner, I'd really like to move that branch to there. And he was like, well, how's that going to make any difference when we move it to that spot? And I was like, sort of grappled with it for a moment. And then I looked, and underneath where this branch was, that I could see was this agave that was kind of like needing to grow on its side on account of all of this detritus that was on the top of it. And I was like, oh. And I went and I moved the branch and revealed the agave. And him and I were both like, oh, that's what that was about. It's like we'd been led to this place, even particularly to find this plant that was sort of like emanating a frequency that was kind of like, I'm in trouble. Now, we have a lot of creatures that are up on that mountain lions, javelinas, ring-tailed cats, skunks, all these wild things, but none of them have fingers and hands that can go and pick up a branch to like help that one that's underneath it that's getting squashed, basically. And in that, what was kind of cool is once we moved that branch, we actually pulled a whole other one out and really freed it up. But then there were these really amazing rocks that had faces that were really cool that we got to sort of like set up and reorganize this whole area. And all of a sudden, the pattern in that space, everything just went. It had this big breath, and like a bell was struck, and it was just like emanating absolute profundity. And I feel like this is where we can be helping hands as humans, and that's what this is. This is really, it's important work, that listening. And sometimes it's like, I don't know why, I don't know what I'm hearing, I don't know what that's about. We kind of have to go and have a little bit of a hunt, to be like, oh, it's that one. It's that agave that's stuck. But initially I couldn't even see it, and neither could he. We were like, what are we doing here? But we found her, and that was really cool.
So funny. It's when you say listening like that, we don't always know what we're hearing. Well, I kind of think that when we talk about these skills that I do believe are the sacred duty of humans, it's very counter to a postmodern environmentalist narrative where all land is better without humans. I think that's actually a really toxic narrative that's causing a lot of distress, especially for the young ones these days. All the teenagers I know, especially living in the city, they have a terrible narrative of, we're killing the earth and we should all just go, and that kind of very toxic. But so you're speaking of like a custodianship narrative that I think is really important, of like that humans have the ability to, we have hands and we have abstract language, and with that we can pray, we can sing, we can tell stories, we can hold that frequency on that other level. But when we talk about deep listening, for me, as the person that I am, I feel like I'm a 2-year-old when it comes to that, right? Like, so often I'm talking to my 2-year-old daughter and I'm telling her, I'm explaining why she can't do this thing or why she does something that way. And I know that half the time she's hearing blah, 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 blah. Like, it just makes very little sense. She knows I'm telling her something important, but she doesn't yet have the capacity to make sense of my speech and my conversation. And I feel like that when I'm doing listening, when I listen to the plants, which, I do a lot and I teach, I listen to the plants and I listen to the land that I'm on, and I try to listen to my heart, and I try to listen to these subtle frequencies. And most of the time I hear blah, 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 and then a little nugget of information, right? So I feel like the kind of work, it's taken me a long time to take the pressure off from myself to actually know how to do that and be like, well, any little baby steps I take in that direction, hopefully I can then pass those on to other people. And maybe we're in like a 10-generational process of reclaiming this skill and and witchcraft. Okay, so we're here talking about witchcraft, and we've both agree that the word witch, it's like, I find it so hard to claim. Like, it happens every now and then that people say, oh, wow, you're totally a witch. And I get this like, ooh, am I? And I don't know why. Like, why is that word so hard to claim?
Well, what's the first thing in you that says, like, if you're asking me, but what is it in you that says why it's hard to claim? Like, we know why.
There's a fear. I think there's a fear of,
Yeah.
there's like a formless fear, but if I sink into that fear more, there's a fear of not being taken seriously
Yeah.
and of it seeming like something that's make believe, and a fear of then being judged. Really, it's a fear of judgment, and maybe that is just a hangover from the witch hunts and the cultural witch wound. But you would say the same thing about, coming out publicly about psychedelic plant medicine, or even saying you're a herbalist. But there's something around the word witch that in my heart I love and relate to, but in a social context gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty loaded word at this point. It is like it has so much baggage on it in its saddlebags that it's really difficult to sort of work out, what is the core and crux of that. And it's been misused, it's been misappropriated. It was utilized as a thing to create fear, to create terror, to create a this thing that happened over a couple of centuries or more and is still being used this day as a defamous thing. And I agree that it's a really tricky word to work out how to own and how to claim. And it can be very challenging when people name it first, which has kind of happened for me all my life, really, since I was really small. And as I got older and weird shit started happening from the time when I was about 11 onwards, and I've tried to be like, I wonder if I dress differently. I wonder if I talk differently. I wonder what can I do to not have this force be emanating out of my body that people name as this thing. And magic knows magic. And I think that it's like we got to work out how to get okay with it or find another word. But I feel like it's kind of it's a bypassing in a certain way if we don't work out how to work out that word. I think our ancestors are calling it of us, because it's there's this thing that's happened where a witch is someone who eats babies in a cauldron, and that gives them immortal power, and they have sex with the devil, and they fly on brooms, and all of these things that we need to ask deeper questions, like where was that mythos created, and for what reason, and how did that take power from what was actually happening, that is naturally who we are as earth connected people. What was the agenda there? And if we can sort of work out how to come under that and own our point of origin, our point of originality with our relation with the earth, then it's kind of like we get a chance to call that power back. That's kind of what I see is what's happening. And that working out how to use that word is really important. It's actually giving it a seat of sovereignty for its point of origin, rather than what it's been defamed to be, and having, thousands of people die on account of being called that.
When you speak about babies being eaten in cauldrons and getting immortality, but really what we're talking about there is misbegotten power, right? Like power that's being claimed in a nefarious and evil way. And I think if you look at the way that Indigenous peoples, not at a similar kind of time in history as well, were also being, they're barbarians who are cannibals and sacrifice, human sacrifice, and all these kinds of stories that were, again, speaking of this kind of misbegotten power, of claiming power in evil ways, which is weird because that's kind of what the colonizers and witch hunters and church were doing, right? Speak of misbegotten power. But making these kind of horrific stories about other people that might have their own power that is rooted in something deeper and wilder and older, right? And maybe to reclaim it, we need to then be clear on what is a witch anyway.
For sure, I think that's why this discussion really is really important. The beginnings of that, of like bringing it to the foray, and I think it's really important to understand that those claims were made with a witch craze hunt, with the creation of the Maleficius Maleficarum, that there was this formula that was put out to overlay culture and create fear. These concepts that were invented, that were made as confessional things that people had to say and sign that they were doing. It was none of none of that is even true. It's like they were forced under the duress of torture to claim that this was happening. And I feel like I know that we talked about beforehand, Steph, about this amazing thing that is happening in Scotland at the moment, for example, where there's those incredible women who are looking at creating pardons for everybody who it was that was executed in the burning times, because of the perniciousness of the lies of things that they were made to confess that they did, that they didn't, and that it was under the name of witchery. Of course we're afraid of this word. Of course we're afraid of being labelled that, because it meant you either were tortured to death or you were tortured and confessed and were killed. Like, it was mass, ethnic cleansing in that way. We're afraid of it.
I was just thinking about that story this morning. And so for people who don't know, there's an amazing BBC miniseries called Witch. You can watch it on Spotify. It's about 20 minutes each. I think it's like 10 episodes. It's absolutely mind-blowing exploration of what is a witch. And one of the women that the presenter interviews, she is a retired Scottish Supreme Court judge. And she's made it her kind of retirement passion project to get official legal pardons for everyone who was ever under Scottish law convicted of witchcraft. And it's interesting because she says something that, as a common law system, so in our Australia, in the UK, we have a common law system. So what is written on the law is important, but just as important are the precedents. So what has gone before, what judges have decided in the past, carries just as much weight as what an actual law says. So under a common law system, there'd be a really good amount of evidence for someone to be currently convicted of witchcraft today. It seemed ludicrous because culturally it wouldn't happen, but cultures can change. And so her passion is that if you get a legal pardon for all of those people, then the precedent of that happening kind of becomes powerless. And for her, she's saying never again, and for the spirits of those people, for that they may rest in peace, kind of, right? That be official and legal. And it's something I never thought about, right? That something like that could happen again. But of course it could. Yeah, I actually was moved to tears when I listened to her speaking.
I cried a lot in that podcast. It was really like a lot for all different sorts of things in all different sorts of ways. And, something that is spoken about is that witches are called to wake as well. Like, more witches come forward in recognizing their bloodline, when it is that there is a call that it is necessary and needed, particularly for the environment. And I'm seeing a really strong flush come through at the moment around that. And so hearing this podcast gave a really incredible context to that. I felt like of understanding that ancestrally, that we're bearing witness to the stories of our bloodlines one way or another, and that this horrific thing happened, and that we're here saying you're not lost and you're not forgotten, and that you will be vindicated, and that your bloodline and the knowledge of actually what you hold and what you held is continued, because we're here. We're still here. We're still remembering. We're still awakening. And in the gentle ways of earth, air, fire, spirit, sun and earth and center, that we are still practicing. And that this is balm, I feel. It's balm for me. It's balm for me and my heart in feeling that for them. There's that, it's the symbiosis.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I really encourage everyone to listen to that. If you have any interest in herbalism, medicine, spirit, spirituality, and history. So hopefully that captures everyone who's listening to this podcast. Then listening to that mini series, which I will link to in the show notes, is really a journey of remembrance and of power. And let's circle back around then. So claiming this word is scary, and there's some good reasons why. But then what is the word? What is a witch to you, Nila?
I feel like, to me, if I was really to just simplify it in simple terms, it's being a technician. It's being a technician of the sacred, and more than just being a person who is a reciprocant of, like somebody who receives that I am having my place in that stream, in that current that is flowing, that I am participating in it consciously, that I am putting forward my service, I'm putting forward my prayerful needs, I'm putting forward my gratitude. And a really big part of that for me now is about doing offerings simply to say thank you, and feeding those ones that help me, that help us, that help the whole process of life. Just like we would put out, water for the birds to drink from, or some seed for that, I also put out water for the spirits, for the unseen ones to drink from. And, as I've started doing that more and more, the water disappears really quickly when I put it forward with this intention. I burn for them. I offer them smoke. I offer them honey, all sorts of different things like that. That part of the practice is really deep for me at this point in time in my life, where it wasn't when I was, in my 20s, where I was, doing things for different reasons. But I feel like that the process of being a witch is about opening up a membrane to be to have a viewpoint that is between ourselves and the cosmos, where there's dialogue, where there's narrative happening, and where there's a mutual recognition of benevolence and reverence that's there. Maybe it's not enough, or maybe that's too much. I every day I come up with different symposiums of what that word means to me. I think it's something that's in motion. What about you, Steph? What do you feel like it is?
If I had to claim that word and use it for myself and for, how I would like to grow and develop into that word in my life, for me, it's around remembrance, honoring, reverence, listening to the earth and to spirit, the elements, all of these pieces of the great cosmic soup, right, that we are swimming in, recognizing patterns, listening, and being of service, being a servant of the world, and helping the human and the nebulous to remain in communication, because it is a job. It's an effort. It's work to get up every day and sit at your altar and give gifts and give offerings and pray and give thanks and listen. Like, it takes time, right? And at this point in my life with a toddler, it's very hard to just find a moment to do that, right? And so my way of working with that practice has become much looser and just more about, making sure every now and then there's a moment of putting hands on earth and just saying hello, of lighting a candle on the solstice, of getting together some honey and bits and pieces with my daughter and going out into our garden and digging a little hole and pouring it in, and together telling her that it's a gift for the spirits of the land, and we're saying thank you for them for having us, right, and for supporting us, and for being in harmony with us. Like, it's become that simple. But there's still this feeling of moving towards prioritizing gestures and actions and rituals that bring the earth alive, so that my own experience, my family's experience of the place we are in is luminous with sentience, and then tending to those relations.
Yeah, beautiful. I can see that what you're discussing creates the capacity for a legacy to continue, also, there's something very beautiful about having daughters and being able to show and share daughters, and then knowing that daughters maybe will have daughters, and that continues that way. There's something really special about that. And I'm finding that with my sons as well, curiously enough, that they're, of course, they have their own way about things, and I'm actually learning things from them all the time too, but they totally get it. Yeah, there was something that you said to me once that was in regards to sort of like working with the tree and the roots of the tree, talking about the proverbial tree, the tree of life. I think it was when you were planning to do, that you were providing discussion in that symposium that was at that place in Melbourne, and you composed a beautiful talk around witchcraft and herbalism. Is that right? Is that what it was called?
Yeah, it was at Garden States conference. I think that was around 2019, and it was for Entheogenesis Australis, so EGA, Australia's kind of major psychedelic plant community. And they actually wrote to me and asked, like, "Hey, are you up for talking about witchcraft? We feel like that's this gap in the conversation we're having about psychedelic plants." And that really threw me, actually, because it was, the fear that we spoke about, and getting up on stage and talking about something that I feel I've only partially claimed is a very strange experience, speaking to like 2,000 people on a big stage with like mics and things. And I did a lot of research. This is pre-children. I think I spent like 60 hours in University of Melbourne library digging out books like from their like archives, and it was quite delightful. Yeah, so that's that story. So what did I say to you that you wanted to
Well,
speak
I
about?
just I remember the profundity and the degree of love and tenderness that you had put into what it is that you communicated about, and that I came away from hearing you wanting to talk to me about that as a bouncing board, and being like, hey, will you listen to what I'm going to say here, because I would love your reflections, and there was this discussion of like, sort of having relation with the tree of life and being able to sort of permeate through the membrane of into the roots. And there was some sort of psychological term that you used there in that as well. But what I took away from it is that the more that it is that we delve into being able to enter into sort of that liminal space of the deeper roots of the world tree, the more that she comes to know us. And I came away with this sense of like that the tree at this point, that she knows my biometrics really well, that I can put my fingerprint on something, and that those gateways at this point will open up because of just having worked for a really long period of time, that she knows me. And I just wanted to circle that back in regards to what you were talking about with working with your daughter, and that sometimes you only get these micro minutes of being able to do something, that the great tree, I love to call her Asherah, the tree of life, the great mother tree, that she knows us, and that as we continue to do that work, that biometrics becomes more and more and more familiar on her, where it is that she's like, oh, Steph's going to give me an offering, like, oh, here, the door's open. It's like, it's easy. At this age now, I don't have to work anywhere near as hard as I did when I was a lot younger to get access in the ways that I do now. And I think that is part of it, is like cultivating a relationship. And it makes me think also of, before you mentioned about there being this theory about that the earth is better off without humans. And I love that the study, for example, that Robin Wall Kimmerer is doing with braiding sweetgrass. There's an amazing chapter in there, for example, where she talks about her and a very dear friend of hers who is her scientific compadre, where they do this series of studies on the nature of sweetgrass over a period of a couple of years, and that the scientific proof in the end that they come forward with a theory that they put forward is that that sweet grasses like ability to be able to thrive is dependent on humans, that there's that that reciprocity that's there is something that's so ingrained with the biometrics being known between those two forces of both human and the plant itself. And it was so beautiful to hear that, to hear that actually we do have a place, that we, if we approach with tenderness and love and speaking the language of the plants, that there is a response that is there, that gives us a sense, it gives us a sense of home, and the earth a sense of like part of her children belonging, which I think is something also that we're reclaiming, especially as European descendants being scattered all over the planet at this point in time through all different sorts of means. And now I'm become an immigrant from being in a different country and really understanding what that word means for myself as an individual, not just as a multi-generational sort of like immigrant status coming from Australia, from original European heritage. It's like there's a lot to unpick and a lot to recalibrate, but I feel like with continual practice that biometric is known with earth. And that's something that I really took from what it is that you shared in that symposium, that actually has really deepened my practice and my relation with life, and with being that hollow force of the channel of deep listening and paying attention. I really got something really deep from what you shared there. So yeah, I wanted to thank you for that.
Thanks, darling. It's actually really funny that you should say this now, because in the last episode on the Sacred Herbalism segment, we were going to have an interview and then we couldn't for some different reasons. So I had a bit of a last minute, what am I going to do for my episode this month? And so I recorded a version of that same talk from EGA as an episode. So everyone who's listened to last month's, there was some background noise issues, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, speaking about witchcraft and enlightenment and the birth of rationalism and the importance of ritual and reverence in all these traditional plant ceremonies, that's all there in last month's episode.
Wow, that's great. Aren't we clever? I didn't even know that. And there's been some good follow through with that. It's yeah, it's amazing.
You were saying earlier when we were chatting before recording that something interesting that's happening for you is that after a decade of really dedicated work with ayahuasca, and that being really the place that you went to find your spiritual practice and your deep listening, because of life circumstances, that's not actually available to you anymore. And so in the last 5-6 years, you've had to really shift the focus of your listening and your connection and this work somewhere else. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like I did have that. I have had. It was very fortunate to have a really deep journey with the grandmother and also the grandfather in that way with peyote ceremony. Not as much, and I feel like what both of those things were able to do for me. Obviously, they're very deep and incredible awakening tools. And it's that thing of like what happens all of a sudden when you don't have access to that cup or that way in front of you anymore. I've been really forced to, number one, integrate everything that I learned rather than just going back to another ceremony in the next 2 weeks or the next month, the next 6 months or whatever that is. Like, it's become this point where that's not something that I can rely on for the trajectory of my own personal evolution. And once upon a time, I would have grieved that like so deeply. You could never have made me believe that it's something that I wouldn't be doing for the rest of my life. And yet it had its day. And that's been a really deep lesson for me also, of just like there's a window where these things are, where these beauty ways are really available to us to be able to glean from. But then what do we do with it out the other side if all of a sudden that's not there anymore? What I have found is that has deepened my relation with being able to come under that and be like, what does it mean to sing to a plant, to call it awake, to call it into my body as I've been taught how to do? What does it mean to have the fire or the tools of connectivity in front of me and be able to maneuver them ever so slightly, a millimeter this way, a millimeter that way, and watch the way that the conductivity of them behaves differently when I make sure that the alignment is just so, which is something that I really learned in peyote ceremony, for example, with the exactitude of how, the half moon altar is kept in the center of the teepee.
And we call them sacred teacher plants because they have taught us something and they've taught you something. And you were saying that they've given you all these skills in how to be in relationship with spirit and with earth in a way without the psychedelic medicines. Yeah. What does that precision look like? Like if you were to sit down, if I was with you now in a cup of tea and I was like, okay, let's go do some magic work on the land, and what would that look like? What would you take me to do? Talk me through that. I want to give people some like really practical insight into that.
Well, yeah, it's I can't say that first of all I would have a formula that I would just go, oh yeah, like, yeah, let's do this, like that there's point A, point B, point C, point D. It's sort of like making a meal in a certain way. It's like every day what I do is something different than what it was the previous day. Sometimes I'll have things running for a certain period of time, in the lead up from like full moon to dark moon or dark moon to full moon, and sometimes I'll shift things out really like pretty quickly. Sometimes I'll leave things, for a good couple of months or even more, or I'll have multi-tabs open working over a longer arc of time, and some, it's very fluid. So in answer to your question, what I would have to say is it would depend on where we were going to go. Because I think that like working with the genus loci of the land is really important, and it would depend on what it is that we were wanting to do, like whether we were wanting to pray or ask for assistance for something, or whether we were wanting to lay down things that were of gratitude or come to know and have relation with the land. It would depend on what time of day. There's a lot of different variables there because it's not a static thing for me. But what I would do is like for us to have a conversation, first of all, about what we might want to do. Maybe we would look at the moon phase of where we're at. We would look, I really like these days in the nature of that precision, for example, I will also work with planetary hours. So like I have an app that's on my phone, which is very helpful. I love technology for helping with magical assistance for those reasons, where, let's just say that we were going to plant a garden, and we were wanting to do a blessing on some seeds, and so that we could go to somewhere that is really powerful. I would look for like working in the hour of Jupiter, for example, to look at expanding, the nature of growth and that kind of thing. And then we would like do some offerings around the seeds, work with earth and air and fire and water. But what I really look for is the precision of how things are placed together. So for me, with being a person who dwells in northern and southern hemisphere, I am really clear that I have to adapt the way that I work and the directionality that I work according to whether I am in the north or whether I am in the south, because the equator sits in a different, the equator, the point of light that it is that we'll be looking for will be different when we're in the south in comparison to when we're in the north. And that throws light and shadow very differently over the earth in the way that we're perceiving things, and that this is really important to the outcome of how things are, whether that we are in alignment with what is happening above us or whether we're throwing things a little bit into chaos, depending. So I really adapt what I do depending. So I work very differently in the northern hemisphere to in the southern hemisphere, and this is something that's very tricky because most of the material that has been written that is about working with witchcraft is all written from people who are northern hemisphere based, who possibly have never even been to the Southern Hemisphere and understand about the fall of light and shadow, and how that is and how that runs in Australia or South America, for example, in comparison to being in European countries or in North America, and the points where we're, like above the equator rather than under it, for want of better terms. And so at some point I'm thinking that I might even write a book about that. I was very, very, very lucky to have a very amazing teacher who was very clear about that. She's an amazing Australian woman. Laura De Angelis has been very imperative in a big knowledge build up for me. And she was really clear in helping me to understand why, not just that it's what we do, but there's reasons why we do what we do. And for me, as a very hungry young woman, to understand the why and the mechanics of things was very, very important. And so just sort of like bringing that back around to being like, how would that look? We would talk about the mechanics of what we were wanting to do. If we were employing different plants, we would talk about the personalities of those plants and how it is that they behave, how they behave in relation with other plants, how it is that they grow, what kind of effect that they have on the body or the consciousness, just like we're talking about in your course at the moment. And then we would align things accordingly. We check the points of where our cardinal directions are, or the points that exist in between. And always we make it beautiful. We always make it beautiful, and we always pray with thanks. And I find that something that's really important to me around that is to get fluid with the process as well. Like, let's say we make an image on the ground that's like a chakana, like some sort of offering dial that's got beautiful seeds and sugar and honey and some plants and corn and, whatever, some crystals, different things, whatever it is that we're choosing to use. We have a look at it and we sit back and we take some time to be quiet and we feel, how's it feeling, Steph? What do you reckon? I feel like that quadrant is not quite balanced. Like, we need something on this side to balance that out. Or what happens if we move that thing like just a centimeter that way? Where's the point where we get the click, where it becomes alive? And this is something that in magic is really, really important, whether it is that we're working with creating, a tincture, whether we're making a sigil, there comes a point where its brewing energy is done and it will let you know. And on a multisensory level, somehow or other, there's going to be a point where we know that it's ready to go. And so for me, precision is a really big part of that, of like just making those micro adjustments until it is that we have the energy, just so that emanation, all of a sudden, that conductivity comes flowing through, and that we're able to really achieve what it is that we're setting out to do. It's not just pretty. It's not just like we do it just because. It's like we work until we find the point where the channel is open. And that's where the work begins.
Wow, I love that. It is, you're the Virgo in me is like, yes, but give me the details and the practical example. But what you're giving there is a framework of, if what we're speaking of as witchcraft is actually a subtle attunement to the earth around us, to the cosmos, to the movement of the planets and the stars and the moon, and to the other people around us, and bringing in an intention or a desire, then the deep listening that's required is to be flexible and to create something that feels right when we turn on that listening sense. Yeah. And that's why when I was 15, I went and bought a bunch of books about witchcraft and Wicca. I was really disappointed because there actually was something very prescriptive in what I was being shown. And there were some beautiful things, right? But there wasn't actually that quality of listening. There wasn't actually the quality of resonance. There wasn't actually the thing that will help to weave me back into belonging to this earth and to this spirit and to this land.
Yeah, it has to come beyond a prescription. I really feel like those prescriptions are there to give a framework, but then you have to adapt according to where you are and according to what is going on and according to what it is that you need or what you're wanting to offer. Sometimes you won't have a plant that comes from some lost island on ancient Greece, that it's got no relation to where you are and what you're doing. But what you can ascertain is, what does that plant do? Like, what's its behavior? What's its personality? And what's something that I've got that's in the area here that I could use as a substitute, or that I could place in that role that is going to achieve the same thing because it has a similar signature. And I think the more that we grow as practitioners, the more we become this fluid. It's a craft. It's creative. It's how we formulate our art in this way. And so to get to the point of being able to do things that are not static is really important, I feel like.
It's like the difference between being a musician who can play covers and being someone who can live jam in this, with a group of other people and have this incredible thing that will never exist again and never existed before, just emerge and sing into the space.
Right. Bam. Absolutely. I love that allegory. That's so great. I love that. I'm going to write that down because it has to make sense to you. It has to make sense to you in the moment. Otherwise, you're just doing things by rote, and it also becomes dogmatic, and I think that for some people, that kind of structure works. And it really works for them. It's like, maybe they are ceremonial magicians and they work specifically with grimoires and doing specific incantations to specific gods and goddesses and that kind of thing. And there can be a lot of beauty and power in that work, but it's a very specific kind. Each of us have to find what works for us, for our personal personality, and listen to sort of what our own instructions are and the own synchronicities that bring us also the helpers to remember to be part of what it is that we are to be part of. It's all a play that that life is a cunning casting agent, I feel like. And if we're paying attention, we're going to catch the cues of what it is that we're meant to do and where we're meant to be and who it is we're meant to play with, Yeah. I'd love to give you more detailed sort of structure around things, I guess, in that way, but it's so point specific. Maybe that can be another conversation that we extrapolate on. I can have like a pre-cognitive thing of being like, you could give me a circumstance of like, can you create a ritual for this particular thing, and then I could bring that forward. But
so
I'm a bit looser.
You're fluid. You're a fluid cosmonaut. It's fine. I love that about you. So I guess what I was reaching for was, for people who might be listening, where this kind of work is really unusual or unfamiliar to them, and yet they're feeling a kind of resonance and excitement of this discussion, right? I know that if I'd heard this discussion 10 years ago, I would have been like super excited and curious and been like, well, how can I access some of that? Like, what do I do to start this unfolding and this learning of this skill? So perhaps that's a really good question. If someone here is listening, how do they start?
Well, if we're talking about a practical sense of sort of starting something, the first thing that comes to mind is to understand where your points of north and south and east and west are. I think something that's become very important in my personal practice is understanding those quadrants. And if we look at so many traditional cultures from across the planet, there is always that relation with the four directions, the four winds, the four quadrants. And, I personally expand that also to then turning it into something that is above and below. And so, getting out a compass and having a look, understanding where you are, like, where are you? Where's your north? Where's your south? Where's your east? Where's your west? And establishing where those places are. And I guess if we're looking at a really beginning kind of formula for things is like perhaps have a candle or something like that for each, and mark each of those four places in a place where it is that you have placed yourself, with you in the center. And sit in the middle of the awareness of those four directions, and then have a look at the axis mundi of the north and the southern hemispheres in your own body, of like the northern point or the above point being above your head, and the south point being what exists below you. For me personally, I love to envision myself as a tree, and sometimes for those like in that sort of liminal space where it is that there's branches reaching from above my head, and that my body is a trunk, and that there's branches that go below me, and around me I have the four directions. And it can just be simply enough of just starting to sit in awareness in the center of those four directions, and the above, below, and within. For me, what happens with that is that it starts to create that biometric connection of like that I am being witnessed by those directions, and that I am witnessing them. There's a relation of symbiosis that begins, and it creates a foundational structure whereby which all things can occur. I love to have a representation of the four elements also within that space, of something that represents earth, of something that represents fire and water and air. And like, yeah, beginning just communicating with them, like opening up that space and really pondering deeply about the relationship with fire, about the relationship with water, about earth and about air, and how we relate to them. Like opening up the dialogue within our own psyche of like what these things mean to us. What does it mean for us to have light and water and breath and a home that grows everything for us? What does it mean to have that starlight above us? What does it mean to be sitting on a giant star that's moving through the cosmos? These things are fucking profound. When we place ourselves in a sacramental attitude of like being in relation with those things, the next steps become evident from there. I feel like that's a place to begin. And in that is like asking those forces that are there around us to help us to remember, to help us to be rethreaded, to quicken our blood, to enliven our senses, and to make us hollow enough to be able to hear and see and smell and touch with ears and faculties that are beyond culturally what we're taught, to open that up, to open us up as being technicians of the sacred. It can be simply as knocking on the door.
Wow. Thank you so much, Nila. That is a really powerful invitation. And I think the most important lesson that any witch, practiced, seasoned, aspiring, hesitant, curious, or practitioner of that communication with spirit, with earth, I think that's the most profound invitation anyone can have along the way, you know. And I feel really inspired to go and just do just that, you know, mark the four directions and sit and feel, start that process, say hello, be humble, be curious, be hollow.
And I feel that part of that is to know that all of those forces that we've just mentioned are also hungry to know us. It's a mutual invitation. They're waiting for us because it's where we belong. And that makes me really emotional, which is great, you know. It's slowly finding our way home along this labyrinthine path.
That's it for this moon cycle. Thanks for joining me in another layer of this fascinating conversation we are having about the role of the sacred in our lives as herbalists. If you know someone who would love this episode, then send it through to them, as our work strengthening our herbal community through grassroots herbal education starts right here. I'll see you next time the moon is round in the sky, and until then, I wish you good health and many plants.